Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about questionnaire design. First, let's look at our learning objectives. First, our learning objective, to understand the process of questionnaire design. Second, to become familiar with mechanics of questionnaire design. Third, to learn tips on what to do and what not to do in questionnaire design. If you look at this process of survey research, and we start with questionnaire, as you can see at the top, and then all the way down to managerial action. So the quality of survey questionnaire is critical to the quality of our results and recommendations. As you can see, that questionnaire design started with our survey objectives, and also we need to know as much as possible about our respondents. So this too would be served as input to help us design a better questionnaire. This is a 10-step process of questionnaire design. It looks kind of complicated, but let's deal with one step at a time. Step number one, we need to find out what are the objectives of our survey research. And those objectives are typically coming from the first two stages of market research, situation analysis and qualitative research. Based upon the results from those research, we would be able to get a better idea of what we want to accomplish during our survey research. Second, we need to know resources in terms of money, time, and personnel. How much money do we have? And how long we need to get it done? And also, what kind of people do we have? Do we have in-house staff who can design the survey and implement the survey research? Or we can outsource or commission third-party research providers. And also we need to understand the constraints. What are some of the constraints and other requirements we need to know? All right. Step number two, we need to decide what type of data collection methods we would be anticipating using. Now, data collection method we have kind of covered in our survey research. We have all different kinds, face-to-face, such as more intercepts, interviews. We can also have telephone and other survey research type data collection methods could be mail, typically snail mail, and also the internet survey research method, which is also we call online. So this, depending on what type of methods we would be used, we would be trying to figure out what kind of question we would put in the questionnaires. Step number two, we need to decide response format. The textbook gives you two different types of response format, which are open-ended and closed-ended. Open-ended basically are questions to which the respondent then replies in his or her own words. You can typically use as probed versus unprobed. And typically those open-ended questions like, why do you like this particular brand? And instead of giving them categories or scale responses, we have them input their own words, and so that we can analyze their responses. On the other hand, closed-ended response format are typically used. In fact, 95% of questions on your survey should be consisting of closed-ended questions, which could be dichotomous between two answers, for example, yes or no questions, or multiple choice questions, or scale responses, which are by far the most frequently used type of category for closed-ended response format. Step number 4, question wording. The wording is extremely important in designing survey questionnaires. We have a couple of guidelines. Number 1, make sure the wording is clear. By clear, we mean we're trying to make sure that no ambiguities would be present in your survey questions. Number 2, try avoiding biasing the respondent, which we'll cover in our examples a little bit later during this lecture. Consider respondent's ability to answer the questions. It's very important for us to know the typical respondent in our survey research so that we can evaluate how sophisticated they are in terms of their ability to answer each specific questions. And for example, are they familiar with this topic? And how much knowledge do you think a typical respondent would have with regard to this particular topic, either politics, health, or other branding related issues? Number 4 guideline is that consider respondents' willingness to answer the questions. Some of the questions may be sensitive, so why you want to word your questions to make sure that the respondents are more willing to provide answers. Questionnaire do's. Now, this couple of guidelines also serve to help you to think about what to do, what best practice we should use. Number 1, be as brief as is appropriate for your audience. Now, that's a very common question. How long a questionnaire should be? The textbook gave you some idea like 10 to 12 minutes response time, which is by far the kind of common practice, because you don't want to create a survey questionnaire which is too contains too little too few questions, like, or you don't want to contain too many questions. So, and why too few? Because when you do research, you want to make sure you get as much information as possible. Next guideline to do is that use clarity in wording. I mean, it's very important to use as clear as possible words you can have, and then to make it simple. And also, next one, actually close related, grammatically simple. You don't want to show your knowledge or your skills in terms of designing questions. Make sure that you have a fifth grader English used, so that it's very simple. And also, you want to focus on single issue or single topic. Why is that? Simply because you don't want to confuse your respondents by asking different topics, because when they answer questions related to different topics, they somehow got confused. Their frame of mind might be confused. So the next, use the respondent's core vocabulary. Now, this is very important. It's like we talked about earlier about understand the audience's profile, to see what type of typical words that they would like to use. So avoid technical jargons, technical terms. Next, use plenty of white space between the questions. This is very useful rule when you design paper-based questionnaire, so that you don't waste, you don't just cram too many questions within one single page. Now, why people do that because the paper costs money. I mean, if you send out survey questionnaires and by mail, and the space as well as its weight all costs money. You want to save money, so that's why you want to minimize white space. But if you cram every question together and then the respondents feel it difficult to respond to your questions, which defeats the purpose, obviously, of your survey questions. Also, number the questions. Use it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way down, so that keep respondents work with a rhythm. I mean, that's how we get used to get things done. And last but not least, questions should be interpreted equally by respondents. So you have to use wording carefully to make sure that question will not create multiple meanings for different respondents. Questionnaire don't do's. So these are a few guidelines that would help you to think about what not to do. So I'm not going to be reading those questions, not questions, reading those guidelines to you directly, but instead, let's look at some of the typical examples. Avoiding using specialized words. This list of words actually, they're common, but there are even more simple words you can use. Instead of using exhausted, you can use tired. Top priority, you can use important, leisure, free time, courage, brave, employment, job, candid, honest. Avoid using vague quantifiers when more precise estimates can be obtained. Now, if you look at this question, actually it's very commonly used by research firms. You see them quite often in many surveys. As a matter of fact, I see it from even the professional research firms. They have this problem. Now, on the surface, it looks okay, never, really, occasionally, regularly. But a close look would reveal that really, occasionally, regularly would be interpreted differently by different people or by different people from different religions. For someone, regular means once a month, or once, to some others, maybe once a week. So make sure that you want to quantify. We can change how many times did you attend a religious service during the past year. Now, time, and then you have the range. We use the range, 0, never, and then probably 1 to 5, or 6 to 10, 11 to 15, etc. So, and then obviously, typically when you gather demographic variables, you can actually get to see what type of religious affiliation your response will have, and then you can do appropriate analysis, try to see divided responses by religion. If you look at this slide, I'm biasing the respondent. This is kind of a typical example. Like, say, you don't want to pass valid judgment to questions, especially to offend. I mean, in this case, probably you might offend your respondents. Do you often shop at lower class stores like a super shop? We all know that it's a fact that we have different classes. Upper class, middle class, lower class. But people have their own pride. I mean, even if you belong to lower class, you don't want other people to pinpoint that you're shopping at the lower class stores. Instead we can use the word called discount stores, or just simply remove the low class. Do you often shop at the stores like a super shop? There's nothing wrong with that. So try to use neutral words or wording. Next common problem is that using loaded or leading questions. Uh, Anytime I look at this question, it reminds me how long I have been teaching this research class. I started my teaching research class back in almost 20 years ago. So at that time, this actually it's like a sample example I copied from a textbook, actually on survey design. So this is obviously it's kind of leading questions, and also don't you think this is actually it's loaded as well. So try not to use this type of question. Next, sometimes you don't want to be too specific. Like a previous example, you want to avoid a vague quantify, but then you don't want to make it difficult for respondent to respond. Now, people tend to have a very vague memory about events during last year, especially in terms of how many books they have read, for leisure. You may be able to get some reasonable good answers from, let's say, during the past month, or even last 3 months, but not during the past whole year. This example is that avoid asking respondents to say yes, to me no. Now, I don't even know how to figure it out, what kind of, do you favor or oppose not allowing the state to raise taxes without the approval of 60% of the voters? Favor, oppose. So make it simple, okay? Do not use double negative. So basically, you want to make sure that simplify your questions. Try to be as clear as you can. Avoid double-barreled questions. So this actually is the most common problem of survey design, of questionnaire design. So basically, like the designers sometimes they want to combine two questions into one, so that they can so-called save the number of questions, but instead, they make it much more complicated. You produce unclear answers, confusing answers. So make sure that you don't do that. Typically, you can do by breaking those questions into two. Instead of ask two things within one question. This one is talk about try not to tax people's calculation ability, or previously we talked about people's memory. Now this time we need to figure out the percentages. Now remember, we have one type of scale called a constant sum scale. We do require respondent to do some calculation with regard to allocation of like dollars to different points for each different attribute of a product, and so they're required to do some calculations that it add up to 100. So that type of scale typically creates some problems for some respondents because the math might be wrong. So this is quite interesting if you look at it, this question. Have you ever shoplifted something from a store? Now, the word shoplifting is problematic, right? Nobody wants to be called a shoplifter. Even the thieves themselves, they don't want to use that word. So how do you change it without substantially change the meaning of the sentence? Anybody has any idea? So when we have a face-to-face classroom discussion, it's hard for a student to come up with an alternative. But sometimes I would be pleasantly surprised if someone would figure out how to do it. Have you? Now, let me give you the correct way or appropriate way to change the sentence to make it less objectionable. Have you ever taken something from a store without paying for it? Step number 5. Now, after we design all those questions, we need to put those questions in an organized manner so that it looks like more like a conversational flow. That's why we talk about flow. Flow is more likely, you imagine there's someone just in front of you, you want to talk to them in a way that makes it easy for them to answer your questions. We have a couple of the sections for those questionnaire layout. Typically, the first part we have screeners question, qualified question typically establish respondents buy-in, or sometimes to screen out those who are not qualified to answer our survey, and also give the respondents some idea of in general what kind of nature of the upcoming questions. And then we follow by a few simple, very simple questions. Try to pave the way for respondent to answer more elaborate question, which need respondent to really think hard about their own attitudes, behavior, beliefs, etc. And then we follow by some transitions. Basically, try to prepare respondent to answer more challenging questions, which start with the second or third of the questions. Those questions typically dealing with rating skills to measure people's attributes, attitudes, beliefs, opinions. Like commonly we use like strongly agree, strongly disagree, or we can use semantic differential scale, like on a scale from 1 to 7. 1 on the one hand is like say modern, the other side 7 is like old-fashioned. So, and also dealing with some controversial issues, or you also want to put those questions within these sections. The last third of the survey questionnaire is that dealing with classification. Typically, the demographic question, personal questions. Make sure that you put those questions at the very end. Do not put those questions at the very beginning. Now, I have to say that nowadays, I do see more and more companies begin to ask those demographic questions at the very beginning. And I don't know why. Maybe because people, they think that people they don't care that much about those sensitive questions, like how much money do you make, or what's your gender, what's your age, that kind of stuff. So things may have been changed, but as a general rule, please put all those classification questions at the very end of your survey. Step number 6, evaluate the questionnaire. So after design all those questions, and then organize those questions by having a nice layout and very good flow, and then you, beyond that, you also need to look at each question to make sure that is this question necessary. By necessary, I mean that do you have to ask this question? Is it related to your research objective? Or it's nice to have because you want to optimize the number of questions in your survey to minimize response time. And also, after design your questionnaire, to make sure you take some time to look at whether it's too long. How long is too long? I mean, again, it's like 10 to 12 minutes. Maximum maybe 15 minutes response time. And we're talking about, it's not about the number of questions, because one question could have multiple sub-questions, and especially if you deal with a matrix type of questions, you can have maybe 5 or 10 sub-items listed at the same time. Obviously, the most important question that, make sure that you look at the research objectives again to make sure that you have all questions designed to help you provide information to accomplish your research objectives. Step number 7, obtain approval from all relevant parties. Now, whether you're in-house staff member designing a survey, you need to get approval from your supervisor. Or if you are a third-party research provider, definitely you need to get a signature from your client, especially from your the one who really gonna approve the budget for the project. Step number 8, it's a pretest and revise. So survey questionnaires need to be pre-tested and then to make sure that everything works out as planned in terms of the number one is that flow, number two is that any problem with logic built into the survey questionnaire, because it's likely that you're going to have some built-in logic. For example, if you answer to question number 5 is yes, and then you want to skip all the way down to question number 15 to make sure that all those skip patterns would have been followed. And obviously, if you catch any problems, any mistakes, and you want to revise, and then move on to step number 9, prepare a final copy of survey. And then step number 10 is implement the survey, send the survey out to your respondents. So that's pretty much for this questionnaire design session. See you next time.